Hi, my name is Phil. I like to talk about politics. In this video, I'd like to discuss the reports that the Chancellor, Rishi Sunak, is considering whether or not to keep going with the government's furlough scheme and how to keep going with it, and how its Conservative opponents are making arguments against it that make no sense whatsoever. But first, if you'd like to be notified of daily news and politics, then please subscribe to the channel and click the bell notification icon. So very briefly, the furlough scheme exists so that people who are unable to do their jobs may be retained by their employers, and the government will pay 80% of their wages to essentially be at home during the lockdown hibernation period. Now, it doesn't cover all employees. Let's make it very, very clear. There are huge gaps in the provision. So many hundreds of thousands have still lost their jobs as a result of the lockdown. And before I get onto the reports coming from the Treasury itself, I'd like to touch on the moronic argument against the scheme that has been put forward by Conservative MPs and echoed by members of the government, it seems, although I haven't seen any actually attributed to an individual minister. So Sir Graham Brady, who is chairman of the 1922 committee, that is basically the group comprising all Tory MPs. It's the Parliamentary Conservative Party. And he said that the furlough scheme should be scrapped because the public have been too willing to stay at home over the coronavirus crisis. Now, a statement like this, of course, speaks to the Conservative way of thinking that the British working force are as lazy as sin. Remember the book written by a number of what are now very senior members of the government, including Priti Patel and Dominic Raab, that called British workers the worst idlers in the world. Well done for voting for them. But that's just blinkered political ignorance. The real brainlessness of this comment is in fundamentally failing to understand how the furlough scheme even works. And it has nothing to do with the workers themselves, because the situation is as follows. So a business employs a number of staff. Now that business has to close or partially close that business to comply with the government's lockdown rules. So they would normally have to make some or all of their staff redundant because they're not bringing anything in, they can't afford to pay the wages. Don't do that, says the government. Don't do that. Keep them on and we will pay 80% of their wages until you can open your business again. All right, said the employers, or a lot of them anyway. Now, at no point are the employees, the workers themselves, asked about this. Whether they are furloughed or made redundant is not a decision for them. It's a decision for the employer. Whether they are furloughed or keep on working, whether it's from home or under slightly different conditions, again, is up to the employer, not the employee. Obviously, if they're going to carry on working under different conditions, there's going to have to be a dialogue there. Can that worker cope under those conditions, like working at home, for example? But nonetheless, it's not up to them whether or not they do it. It's up to the employer. So the idea that people, workers, are choosing to be furloughed is the thought process of an imbecile. That's not how it works. And the idea that the employer is urging the furlough scheme to some benefit is also ludicrous, beyond any potential fraud that may be going on, because they're not making any profits at all in hibernation. These people want their businesses open. Because even with their workers being paid 8% of their wages, that's not bringing any profit into them. So now that that moronic line of thinking is out of the way, what's the Treasury's thinking? So obviously the scheme is a form of socialism and means using public funds on the public. So from that point of view, it's obviously not going to be popular in a Conservative government. But that's hardly the discussion that they are going to have in public, except for a select few hundred of the more dim-witted Conservative MPs, basically most of them. Reports seem to indicate that about 6.3 million people are having up to 80% of their salaries paid using the scheme. I say up to because they will pay a maximum of £2,500 a month. But that's fine for, you know, most workers. I mean, that's significantly above the median average wage. Now, if we are using the UK median average wage of just over £30,000, and we assume that this is also the median for those accessing the scheme, and I don't know whether it is or it isn't, then that would translate into a cost of about £12.3 billion. Now, obviously, it's not actually a cost of £12.3 billion because some of that goes back to the Treasury anyway in the form of national insurance and income tax. So again, a bit more napkin maths based on numbers, because I don't know whether the median average wage for people furloughed is the same as the national average wage. So if we went off that, then that would actually mean a total actual cost of £10 billion, taking off what would be paid in national insurance and income tax. That's a month, £10 billion a month, not over the whole crisis. We don't know how long the crisis is going to go on for. Now, to put that into context, that's costing about the same as the government spends on the NHS. So it's not an inconsiderable sum, because obviously we don't know in terms of government spending. The average person doesn't know what is a lot of money and what is not. But it's not quite as simple as saying that it costs another NHS to fund, because that's not true either. Because if they scrapped the furlough scheme, or they'd never put it in place, then those people would be out of work altogether, and you'd be the government would have to then pay unemployment benefits. You'd also end up with rent arrears occurring and all the rest of it, greater strain on social services, blah, 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 blah. So I don't even know that the £10 billion that they're spending on this is even more than the cost of scrapping the scheme. It could be that scrapping the scheme would cost even more when everything's taken into account. I simply don't have access to all the data. I'd need to work it out. I'm sure it's available publicly. It would take a very long time to tease it all out. But anyway, that earlier brainless statement about people being apparently too comfortable at home on 80% of their pay, coming from people who are comfortable at home on full pay, which is way above the median average, is still holding a little sway. So after all, ministers have to be careful of their backbenchers. So the Chancellor is reported to be talking about winding the scheme down after July. Not necessarily a cliff edge stop, but lowering the cap perhaps. Now that would not necessarily be a completely ridiculous idea, because if you lower the cap, well, remember the poorest workers, the ones who are most affected, wouldn't be affected by a lowering of the cap. They're not earning up to the cap right now anyway. So it should still protect the lowest paid workers after a fashion. But bear in mind, of course, it is the lowest paid who can at least afford a 20% pay cut that they are enduring at the moment, thus adding another moronic dimension to the already cretinous notion of such people being comfortable at home. Not many people are comfortable when they can't really pay the bills. But I did then see another report, and that the plan would not just be to lower the cap, but also to drop the amount paid to 60%. Now that's crucial to bear in mind, because bear in mind that the official government definition of poverty is 60% of the median wage. So this would be a policy that actually puts people into what the government themselves accept and define as poverty. So depending on what actually emerges, it's possible that this discussion in the Treasury is simply a way of batting away the criticism by announcing a date when it will be scaled back to blunt the cries from people who really want it completely ending and immediately, as if that will somehow make the public finances look better. Or it could be that they are getting ready to go along with the brutish savagery favoured by Conservative MPs and are not wanting to be too definitive about it until they have to. Whatever they're doing, it is allowing, of course, the reports to come out in the papers about the scheme, which is duly happening. I've already seen reports in the papers talking as if they know what the decision is, even though it hasn't been announced. But that's my reading of the situation anyway. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Hope you found the video interesting. If you did, don't forget to click the like button. And if you'd like to support the channel further, then please also click the Patreon link for details. And until next time, I'll see you later.